Hi, Dominic Steele here, and this is The Pastor's Heart. It's good that you could join us today. Now, we're talking today marriage, marriage as a Christian minister, and marriage in the congregation, and how we can support and encourage marriages. And with me, I have Sarah and Keith Condie, and it's great to see you guys. Welcome along.
Thanks
Thanks
Dominic.
for joining us.
Yeah. Lovely to be here.
And you, of course, are co-directing the Mental Health and Pastoral Care Institute at Anglican Deaconess Ministries here in Sydney.
Yes.
And you've just, for years you've been writing a course for 2 decades or so you've been writing a course and serving lots and lots of people in strengthening and enriching marriages. But it's just coming out this week as newly released as a video course, and we're going to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
But let's go back to the very beginning of your interest in how to enrich people in their marriages. I guess it came about when you were working at Moore College.
Yes.
So it would have been about the early 2000s, and a year group at college asked us if we would run a marriage day for them. And
little you knew this was going to happen.
Well, we had no idea what we were doing.
Yeah.
But we thought, well, yes, we'll give it a go. And so we did that. So that was really the start. And the other prompt for us was that around that time, there was a year group that had been out of college for about 5 years. And there were about...
I think there were 7 or 8 marriage breakdowns.
In one year?
In one college
of
year.
Moore College graduates.
And,
wow.
And we felt that was quite a high number. And we wondered whether if we did some work helping couples before they left college to work on their marriage, that might help.
Yeah.
So,
we've been running this divorce care course here,
which is great.
and helped so many people in the brokenness of divorce. And although you think, if only we could do more in preventative medicine, then we wouldn't have to. So how did you go? What did you start doing? Yeah.
I think what we did was we started thinking, okay, what do we do here? We did a lot of reading, and we thought about what the Bible says about marriage. So we put a lot of thought into that, and then tried to look at some significant recent marriage research and what that was saying. And then we tried to bring those two things together, actually, and what we found was that seemed to be really well received by people. They seemed to find it helpful. Because I think from the research, we could say we know marriages don't work because of human sin, but that seems to take particular forms and particular expressions within the context of marriage. And so there are patterns that emerge, and these have been studied. And when you look at that, when you look at the sort of warning signs that come up, and when you look at the sorts of things that actually help couples stay well connected, a lot of that data fits really nicely with what the biblical material says. And bringing those two things together.
And God really knew what he was talking about.
Yes.
Let's go to the minister's marriage first. Were there any particular things that, because I'm imagining that, once you start to be somebody who's teaching in this area, as a community of ministers, we're going to look at you and think, they've got things they could help us in this area. And therefore, I'm imagining a number of ministers who are struggling or finding things complex in their wives have come and talked to you about their complexities.
Yeah, and that has certainly happened and taken place, yes.
Yeah.
And we've been asked to speak at, conferences of, clergy couples and talked about what's difficult.
What are the particular pressures and difficulties?
Yeah.
Because we've got a lot of ministers with us listening, watching it now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So,
there are some fairly common patterns that seem to emerge, and I think one of the huge challenges is when you're serving the Lord, you want to do that with your whole heart and pour yourself into it, and that's a wonderful thing. But I think what happens is some people in ministry pour so much of themselves into it that they don't leave much for their marriage and their family. And
often it's the husband who comes home and he's just tired and he's got nothing left in the tank to give to his wife, or if he has any, he spends time with the children, and I think often a wife feels quite neglected. And so that, I think that's a fairly common pattern that we've noticed.
Yes, and something sort of flows out of that, which is for a number of wives, if their husband's the one in ministry, for a number of wives, they can feel like God almost becomes the third party in the relationship. Because, and this happened in our marriage, you know, I'd come home late and Sarah would feel neglected, and she might say something to me, and I might just react and say, look, I'm just trying to do the Lord's work here, but I'm doing the Lord's work at the cost of our marriage.
And it's very hard. You know God and ministry and work is important, so how do you express how you're really feeling in a way that can be heard and seems legitimate? I think a lot of wives would struggle with that. And so I think often they might not express it, or then they start getting angry over time. And then suddenly, I think also what happens is that wives, if particularly young couples, when they've left college and gone out into ministry, they've also got lots of small children, or they've got babies. And that's the most stressful time in any couple's life, really. The wife really loses a sense of who she is, because she's the one that's at home doing everything at home to keep the family going, and her sense of who she is in Christ, she loses that. And I think she even thinks, well, does God really love me? And
tell us about, I mean, obviously don't tell us their names, but if you could just tell us a little bit more about some of those women and their issues. Yeah.
Well, I think then it's like, well, what do you do with that? You know, I think that's hard. You know, it's sort of, and I think it's actually it's a silent struggle, because it's hard to articulate. And
it's hard to even understand when you're feeling that way, I think.
So I think for many women, it's helping them remind themselves of who they are in Christ, and even to remind them of things that they're good at and they like doing, and even for husbands to help encourage their wives to feel like they can do things outside of the home. That can often help. I
think a lot of us guys are just unaware, and this happened in our marriage. You know, I think I was really unaware of the impact of what I was doing upon Sarah. I mean, I've always loved Sarah, and she's always been precious to me, but I just think I lacked an understanding of what she needed in this particular situation, and that had big implications for our marriage. We had a lot of work to do.
To be honest, I think I got quite depressed, and Keith said to me, well, why don't you do something you like doing? And I thought, I don't know what that is.
Can't think of anything,
So that's quite a bleak place to be, to be honest. And I wouldn't, part of my reasoning of really wanting, when Keith was on faculty at Moore College, was I thought, I don't want other ministry wives to go through that, because I don't think that's a really good place to be. And so I was really happy to keep doing what we did. So anyway. So,
I mean, I listened to what you just said, and you think, okay, I don't want to be the guy who's doing that and doing that to my relationship and doing that to my wife. And then I think, but I do want to work wholeheartedly for the Lord.
Yes.
So just if you could just tell me how to get the perfect balance there.
Well, I actually think it's when you're really busy, it's actually investing in your marriage in little ways and working out how you can do that, like day to day, week to week. It's even just little things. You can actually communicate that you're connected and that you're there for each other.
And that's the thing. How do you maintain that sense of connection between the two of you, where you feel like you've both got the time and the energy to be able to share what's really on your heart with each other, because that's what we need, and that's what makes for a strong marriage. So I think now, look, there's always times of crisis. Okay, you have a really busy week, unexpected things happen, or a busy few days, but to live permanently like that, I
Is-
think is problematic for ministry marriages.
And I want to say God has given us 24 hours in the day, and I think, are we trying to do 36 hours worth of living in that 24 hours? I think there's something about being wise about how we fill our days, and we can make choices. And, you know, if you can do your ministry. If your marriage ends, that's the end of your ministry, really. So actually to invest in that marriage, and out of a strong marriage, actually God does so much more.
And it's
blesses,
so good for the church when the ministry staff have strong marriages. That's one of the greatest things I think we actually
And the members can see,
offer.
I'd like to have a marriage
Yes.
like my pastor and his wife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how it's just, and look, this doesn't take, this doesn't take, I think, an enormous amount of effort. I don't think and there's no rocket science here. It's
No.
just finding that time. It doesn't have to be a huge amount of time, but a little bit of time
a lot of
each
the
day.
research would say 5 hours a week of investing in your marriage, which
5 hours a week, intentional investing in your marriage.
over
So
7
maybe
days.
that's one sort of date night or significant chunk of
just have a
time.
night together.
But maybe it's 5 or 10 minutes a day where it's just the two of you, and there's a chance to share
Just
about
catch
what's
up on.
going on and catch up,
And you pray together.
pray together,
And
pray together.
I think for us, and I mean we're all the same age, but remembering back to it, and it isn't as stressful for me now
No.
as it was
No.
when there were little children
Same-
around.
same for us.
Yeah.
We just the two of us
Yeah.
now.
But when there were little children around, to get home and to say to hi Kathy, hi Hannah, hi Solomon, hi Abraham, now I'm going to ignore you three and
Yes.
spend time with Kathy, because the most loving thing I can do for you three is to invest in her. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess that's a challenge, isn't it? It's working out how you do that. Do you do that when you first come home, or do you actually invest in the children, spend the time with your children, and it's maybe after?
I don't know. We were confused. We went through seasons of
Right.
doing. I mean, I'm you're the experts, but
I actually don't think we are experts.
No.
at all.
but we found that I can't remember who told us this. Somebody said it's actually good for your kids to see that your relationship is primary, you
Yes.
know, and that
Yes.
and that they're not the centre of the world.
Yes.
Yes.
That mum is more important to dad than they are, and to model that by actually saying, "No, kids, I'm going to invest in mum." Yeah.
And I guess it's working out how you do that at age appropriateness. Like an 18-month-old is not
going
to
to get that
understand
logic.
that. But, when they're at school, yes, they will understand that. So I guess there's I just think that is something you have to work on, depending on at what stage you're at with your children. Because after school you've got sport and all sorts of things, so you might actually be helping with the tag team of picking a child up from soccer or, all of those kind of things.
Now, you must have had some moments where somebody's come to you in absolute crisis, and I mean, there'll be some where things have not worked out and it's continued to spiral into disaster. But there must be a few stories where we've been able to, by the power of the Spirit and the miracle of God and useful counselling and stuff, we've been able to pull things back from the brink, and 10 years later, things are going well. Do you want to talk about a couple of those?
I know a couple where they were in a very bleak place and shared very deeply and honestly, and I think we both were a little concerned. And I mean, we prayed with them, and we actually suggested that we gave them this. Remember, we gave them pieces of paper with things for them to do, random acts of kindness to do for each other, and we said we wanted them to do.
We wrote them on a piece of paper, stuck them in a jar, gave them the jar.
Really?
And
Pull one out. Did we say every day?
It
Or
was
one a
either
week?
one a week, or I can't remember now. But they actually did it, and they each had one, and they actually each had to do that thing for the other. And they came back to us a few months later and just said that had helped turn their marriage around. And that, I mean, I think there were probably a few other little things that they were doing, but that they recognised there was something very significant about that for them.
And that's the thing. See, it's not huge stuff. It's just, little things every day that can make an enormous difference. It's paying attention. Every interaction we have with our spouse affects the emotional tone of the relationship. Every interaction. And so,
I mean, you talk in the course about harsh startups, I think it was you who taught me years ago about harsh startups, but just to be making sure the first word of the day, is good morning, not I wish you wouldn't.
Yes, exactly.
It's a lot about politeness, the saying hello and goodbye and please and thank you that we can take
for granted
forget.
in the busyness of the moment. Yeah.
And not doing that with each other. It's just so important.
So the video course.
Yes.
I've written a few video courses. When you think you're halfway through, you're just really at about. When you think you're at 90%, you're really at about 30%.
We
I
cannot
think that's what we learned.
believe how long this has taken and how much work's been involved. Yeah, it's just
It's been enormous, and it's not just the work that we've put
We've
in,
done,
but
no.
a team behind us who have just helped us enormously.
yes.
Yeah.
Now, there's a participants workbook, there's a facilitator manual, and the thing that so there's five. Just to run through, I'll just run through five sessions. It seems as though each session is 2 hours long, but with an hour of content.
Yes,
And the thing that I hadn't grasped when I heard that you were going to release this, I hadn't initially grasped that the plan is to do it over a weekend.
Well,
Or you can do it over 5 weeks, I suppose.
You could do it over a weekend, and we know a church did that last year. They trialled that and said it worked really well. And we've had a couple of churches trial it running it over 5 weeks.
Right.
One night a
One
week.
night a
Yeah.
week.
Yeah, so I think, we'd run the alpha one
Yes.
and a year or two ago, and we ran it over the 5-7 weeks that they have. And that's quite a lot in the calendar of the church year to ask people to come to church, to come to community group, and to come to this night.
Yes.
Whereas as I was reading through the facilitator's manual, I thought, a Friday night, all day Saturday and Sunday afternoon, I think that might work for us in the busy rhythm of our
Yes.
church.
And I think all churches are different,
Yeah.
and we'll work out like a time, whether they do it over a weekend like you, or even on a Saturday afternoon,
Yeah.
3 till 5,
Yeah.
or
Over a few weeks.
Over a few weeks, yeah. Now, it's God's design for marriage. Just looking through what damages our connectedness in marriage. That's session 2. You can probably tell me the time you've gone over. Building the positives, friendship and communication. And I'm just going here. And sex and spirituality, the positives there. And was it conflict, the last
Yes,
one?
managing conflict.
Conflict
yeah.
gently.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. It's more theological than the Alpha course. That was one of the things that jumped out at me both watching it and actually Kath and I have just begun to do it on our own. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, we think it's unique actually, and in a few ways. One, it's Australian.
Yeah. Well, actually,
So
we should
speak
say,
like this.
It's Australian and it's Sydney in that you're actually it's beautiful. You're the course is conducted in the inner west in Balmain, looking out over Sydney Harbour, ferries and yachts in the background.
And I want to say, if people get bored with listening to us, they
They
can
can
just
look at
Look at the
boats.
ferries. Yeah, watch those.
look at the boats.
Yeah. So it's that. And then what we've tried to do, it's like what I said before, we've tried to bring together the wisdom of the scriptures with the wisdom of the marriage research and bring that and put them together. And we think that's a real strength actually to the course, because that's what we found so helpful and that's what other people seem to have found helpful as we've presented the course over the years.
And what we found interesting is that the Christian audience seemed to find it, like what you're saying, deeply theological and biblical, but we've found that the people who are not Christian have found it accessible. And actually our graphic designer is not a Christian, and he said, have you just done this for the Christian audience? Because he said, this has so much that would be of value to the secular world. So I thought that was interesting.
I think if in modernism we were arguing truth and facts, and then postmodernism, we reject truth. Well, really, postmodernism, it's pragmatism. You know, it does this work and does this work for my life. And so I actually think a course like this that just shows how the gospel works in life. I mean, it's not written as a pre-evangelistic course,
No.
but it has real merit and real possibility for us to run for the playgroup mums and their
Yes,
spouses.
absolutely.
And, yeah.
And interestingly, in the final session on managing conflict, we have a story. A couple share their story, and their conversion story is part of that story, which is, it's a really powerful story, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Where do
So-
you land theologically on some of the issues in marriage during the course? Because there's lots of contentious issues as you talk about marriage.
There are lots of contentious issues. So we, a lot of it's built around Genesis 2, and so that's really our starting point. But a lot of people, when they talk about Genesis 2, they stop at verse 24 and not verse 25. So for us, the man and the woman were naked and they felt no shame. For us, that's actually a really significant part of the course, because we think there's a picture
of beautiful marriage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and connectedness.
That's
yeah.
God's design. Is this picture of openness, intimacy, safety, connection. It's a wonderful picture. I think the true fulfillment of that we see.
I remember somebody saying to me once, and I'll check with you and see if it's right, but you've got camera angle 1 of creation in Genesis 1, and the end point, the beautiful point is God saw all that he'd made and it was very good.
Yes.
And then camera angle 2 of creation, naked and no shame. It's another way of saying
It's
God saw it as very
Yes.
good.
beautiful and
Yes.
very pleased with it. And
Yes.
then with the fall, that the first thing that Adam and Eve do is hide themselves. So there is that shame and that blame.
Yeah.
And
So-
you explore in session 2 the fall. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we talk about what Adam and Eve did once sin did enter the world, and again, we don't spend a huge amount of time going into that in a lot of detail, but we think that idea of when there's a problem in a relationship, when you don't feel you can be completely open, you don't feel totally safe, you keep stuff to yourself, it starts to build a barrier between a couple, pushes you further apart.
So you hide from each other.
Hide from each other. I think the picture there in Genesis 3 really, it has a lot of resonance with what happens when marriages are not working well. So we talk about that. We don't.
I thought you explored, if you like, the horizontal consequences of the fall rather than the vertical consequences of the fall.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's partly that we, it's not an evangelistic course, as you say. So we don't want to. We deliberately didn't want to keep explaining the details of the gospel throughout everything, but we just think there are a number of bits and pieces. There's quite a lot of Bible in the course, but things that we think, we say at the start that even if you don't share our faith commitment, we hope there's things here that will be useful for you. And so we're just trying to, as you say, to have that sense of, I suppose, biblical content informing the world in a helpful and wise way. And in
Session 5,
session 5
we come
too.
to talking about forgiveness, and we all need forgiveness and to say sorry. And so I think
we have I say a few words there about why forgiveness is such a significant thing for Christian people. And so we're hoping that this really will be a benefit to people who are not Christian as well. And I think for anyone if someone's hostile to the faith, I think they'll find the course difficult. But I think if there's a reasonable level of sympathy towards Christian things, I think they'll find great benefit in the course. And I think a church could run it in such a way that they do advertise it to the wider community.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really clear. I just add, I think what's going to happen, just having had, I've had it for a week to look at, and I've had a bit of a look, and then Kath and I have started to do it together. I'm pretty sure in a year's time, lots of us are going to be running this course, and because really, as you just said, there's nothing else out there quite like this. Certainly there's nothing Australian out there, and there's nothing that goes remotely near touching the theology with the wisdom and actually touching the theology at all compared to what you've done here. I think it's going to be widely used, and you've done us a great service. And so thank you very much.
Thanks, Dominic.
Thank you, Dominic.
If we just come back to a marriage in trouble for a minute, a marriage in trouble with temptation of a third party, and how do you counsel? How do you help? How do you speak into that? I mean, as a minister, how do you give us a bit of coaching on how to speak into those situations? Yeah.
I think when there is a third party, that is always an indicator that something's not working in the marriage, and there's a problem there. And so even the temptation of wanting to look elsewhere, even if nothing's happened, but that sense of being drawn to perhaps someone in a work environment or something like that, that's a sign. Okay, what's not quite working right in my marriage, and the key is to go back and do that work in the marriage. And this is again this is where we hope the course will help, because it's got lots of tools and lots of ideas that are trying to, if couples have drifted apart a bit, to try and rebuild that connection.
But I think the other thing I would say is you need 100% of both couples to want to keep the marriage going. And I think one on their own, that's really hard. If the other has, stepped out. That's not to say things are impossible, but that makes it very difficult.
I think the other thing too, and this is particularly, I think, important for ministers, is to have relationships of friendship and accountability. Your spouse can't meet all of your needs. It's crazy to think that. So having relationships where you can be honest, share what's going on, and if you have a temptation, you're drawn towards somebody else, then you need to talk about that with someone. You bring it into the light, have somebody ask you questions about that, pray with you, encourage you to do those, to make those steps, to keep investing in your marriage and working on that. I think that's really important as well.
One last question on the course. I just remembered. You call it building a safe and strong marriage. Just the word safe, because we had a chat about this on the phone a few weeks ago.
We did.
As I've been watching the course, you're using the word safe really as my marriage and my relationship with my wife is a place where I feel secure. It's a place where I feel home. It's a place where I can be vulnerable. That naked and no shame idea, rather than the way safe is being used in the wider context at the moment to do with domestic violence. Do you just want to talk about that distinction for a minute?
Yes. We might have made a strategic error here by using that word now, realising, and you really alerted me to this, Dominic, thank you. So it's a little bit ambiguous, because we've actually used the course does have an awareness of domestic violence. It does, violence.
Twice in the first session I noticed you raised it. Yeah.
And it comes up in other sessions as well, and we've got material in the book about that, encouraging. Can I say the course is not designed to fix that problem?
No.
People really do need professional help there.
Yeah, you were clear to saying we're dealing. I heard somebody once talk about marriage. I think it was John Piper's successor. He had a really helpful line that in the normal marriage there'll be a rhythm of sin, repentance, forgiveness, reconciliation, and over here you'll have a different kind of marriage of pursued and pursuer, and a victor and victim, and our advice for this kind is totally different to that kind.
Yes. So I think the word is used in two different ways throughout the course, and we hope that doesn't confuse people too much. But hopefully from the first session, that idea of exactly what you just said about the
being
idea
home.
being home for each other.
Oh,
It's
it
that
comes
sense
out
of safety.
spectacularly clearly at the
Right.
beginning. Yeah. Thanks so much for coming and talking to
Thank
us.
you.
Oh,
Thank
thanks
you
for having us,
Dominic.
Dominic.
It's a pleasure.
It's been
Yeah.
great to be here.
Sarah and Keith Condie have been my guests on the Pastor's Heart today, and it's been great to have them with us. And we'll look forward to seeing you on this program next week.